Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Ryan Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of Arizona NORML. And with us today, we've got a couple guest speakers. We've got Justin Streichel from NORML over in Washington, D.C., and Julie Donegal. And I'm going to turn it over to both of these wonderful people to talk a little bit about themselves for a minute. Let's start off with Justin.
Hey there. Thank you so very much, Ryan, for having me. It is a privilege to get to chat with, with an amazing leader like yourself, with Arizona NORML, and with Julie, and to hear more about how these kind of policies are actually going to play out in real time if and when Arizona legalizes marijuana with Proposition 207. My name is Justin Streichel, and I am National NORML's political director and federal lobbyist. So normally I'm spending my time, walking the halls of Congress, or in the day and age of COVID, calling into the halls of Congress, working to drum up support amongst elected leaders to end the federal prohibition and criminalization of marijuana. But now that the strongest legislative efforts have been tabled until shortly after the election, when we do expect to get a vote, I'm going to be spending my next month helping out Arizona NORML and a couple other chapters around the country in the push in the states where we have ballot initiatives. So it's really, really exciting to get to work alongside you, Ryan, and your whole team with Arizona NORML. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Julie's perspective as well.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Julie, love to hear a little bit from you.
Well, and I'm just so excited about Prop 207 and that Arizona NORML is going to get a win here in just it's less than 30 days away. So, hi everyone, I'm Julie Donegal. I'm a prosecutor. I am a vocal proponent of the legalization and decriminalization of marijuana. It's something that is a long time coming here in Arizona. And I want to tell you for just one hot second what a sea change it would be to have a prosecutor who is a vocal proponent of the end to prohibition. Because in our state, we're one of the last states, actually we are the last state in the nation that has marijuana as a felony. And we need to change that. We have an opportunity on our ballot here in just a few days. They'll be arriving in the mail. And I'm just so excited to work alongside the two of you to deliver a win.
Thanks, Julie. And you touched on a couple of pieces right there. In fact, one of the things I'd like to bring up is, the creation of jobs and revenue first. And Justin, I'd love to ask you, what does that look like, on a national level? What do you guys see happening in other states, especially, now that legalization is moving as far as it has?
Well, our friends at Legal.com compiled an aggregate of the jobs numbers out of the various legal states earlier this year, and including the adult use and medical cannabis industries that are state legal, it is projected that there were 243,000 full-time American tax-paying jobs up and down the supply chain. And one of the things that I often tell our friends who are federally elected is to put that in context. That is more than 3 times the number of Americans working in the coal industry in this country right now. And this is a growing economy, and we're only starting to really scratch the surface, which is why it is absolutely critical that as we move from an illicit, unregulated market into a regulated, safe consumer marketplace, which 207 will help push us there, that we make sure that those jobs are good paying jobs. And the median income for someone in the cannabis industry is $58,000 a year, which is well above the national average. So it's these are important jobs to have. There are a lot of tweaks that we need to do at the federal level to make it easier for businesses, because right now, unfortunately, the cannabis industry isn't able to do things like deduct the cost of employees' healthcare from their taxes. But those are other things that we're going to be working out, which is why it is absolutely essential that Arizona legalize marijuana with Prop 207, so that way all of your federal delegation will be that much closer to should they choose to represent the state in supporting ending prohibition at the federal level.
Awesome. Thank you. And that illicit market that you just referenced there, is that something that we see a decrease in the areas that go full legal?
Yeah, every state that has legalized marijuana has had a decrease in the size of their illicit market. And these things take time. A lot of our opponents who are supportive of maintaining the cruel and failed policy of marijuana criminalization like to point to some data that's coming out of the emerging markets where that are saying, oh, legalization hasn't eradicated the illicit market overnight, therefore we shouldn't legalize. Well, candidly, that's a load of crap, because what we're talking about is moving an entrenched consumer economy out of the shadows. The illicit market has now had over 80 years to establish itself and flourish. And setting up these new legal marketplaces take time. Building consumer trust takes time. And slowly but surely, year after year, we see the size of the illicit market shrink as a percentage of the total overall economic activity when it comes to marijuana. If prohibition was an effective policy, then we wouldn't have an illicit marketplace, period, full stop. And the reality just bears it out. I have heard rumors that there are people who choose to consume cannabis in Arizona, despite the fact that it is prohibited. I myself may have done that the last time I was in Arizona, but I couldn't possibly comment on the record.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
can I chime in there about that illicit market too? I think it's just so important how this issue fits into like some broader issues about criminal justice reform, right? Because in Arizona, we spend more in our prison system than we spend in our world-class university system, in our community college system, in our public health system combined. Tonight alone, we're going to have 150 folks who are in our prisons for no other reason than simple possession of marijuana. So as we're talking about, just revenue being generated is also a big cost savings, because 150 people actually isn't even the full number when you look at some of the other marijuana related and cannabis related crimes for which people are serving time. It's a savings of millions of dollars. When you combine that with a tax, a test, and a regulate system, which is what 207 establishes, I know that the projected yearly revenue is upwards of $300 million that'll be flowing into our state. I think that's powerful.
Yeah, that's huge. And what would it do if it freed up the prosecutors' time to actually pursue a lot of the other crimes that are really detrimental?
Right? Almost like we should have our priorities straight and be focusing on crimes of violence, crimes that target women, children, and our seniors, and financial crime and public corruption.
I think that's something that I'd love to have our prosecutors focused on those topics, especially when it comes down to the safety of our kids, and really focusing on what we could do for the communities out there.
Right? Isn't that really the truth of it? Like, our prosecutors ought to be going after people who commit harm to our communities and being able to restore that harm and repair that damage. And the marijuana prohibition and cannabis prohibition is emphatically not that. So I'm so excited to see both a sea change and to see, a bunch of prosecutors like me who are committed to these reforms, because they just make sense.
Absolutely.
And Ryan, if I could build off Julie's comments a little bit, which are absolutely foundationally, fundamentally correct. We're seeing this, and prosecute, and people who, like Julie, are stepping up to run for office, for these positions, exactly because we are now having this national conversation about a realignment of priorities, and that's why I'm so excited to be sharing this platform with Julie, and I hope that folks in Arizona will check out her website, and find out more about her campaign for office. But we had Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby come and testify before Congress, talking about how federal marijuana prohibition, it adversely impacts her ability to do her job on the streets of Baltimore, which Baltimore, I'm just 45 minutes away here in DC. It's a city that often gets the ire of the president of the United States. And when we have law enforcement officials saying, no, stop having us enforce these absurd policies. Please let us do our jobs. You're not going to have strong community police relations. And particularly, just to put a fine point on it, in this moment, in this day and age where the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and these absolute cries for a realignment in policing priorities and values and the way that they interact with different communities in different ways, we clearly see a racial component when it comes to the enforcement of marijuana prohibition. On average, despite similar consumption rates, Black Americans are nearly four times more likely than white Americans to be arrested for marijuana. And one of the things that I point out here in DC often is right across the river in Arlington, Virginia, that racial disparity is 8-1. And it's these kind of like clear things where we see law enforcement using selective enforcement of cannabis criminalization to target our friends and in the Black and brown communities, and they're less likely to be able to afford a lawyer to fight the case. They're more likely to have that criminal record on for the rest of their lives, making it harder for them to get jobs and housing, etc. And I'm sure Julie can speak more towards how, about recidivism rates and all those other issues and how they're affecting you guys locally in Arizona.
Oh, Justin, I'm so glad you went there, because that's exactly the system here in Maricopa County, and our prosecutor actually tried to fight a public records request to not reveal the data. And when they finally had to pay $24,000 in a judgment and reveal the data, we saw the exact same thing. That a Black Arizonan has 4 times the likelihood of a white one to be convicted of a marijuana offense. That's to say nothing of arrest disparities and disparities within fines and sentencing. So one of the things that I think is so important as we're considering props like Prop 207 is to acknowledge the lasting and pervasive and, quite frankly, systemically racist harm that our marijuana prohibition has perpetrated on communities. Like, we just need to be able to say it and say it out loud, and then commit to being able to change it. And I think the big portion with 207 and the prosecutor's office is giving folks a second chance. We haven't had an expungement statute in Arizona for a while. I can't think of the last time we had an actual real expungement statute that let somebody get away from that prior conviction. So I'm really excited about what it would mean to have somebody who's emphatically pro expungement, who's able actually to initiate a lot of those expungement hearings as well, so that we could get people that real second chance, especially when it's the lingering and lasting stigma of a felony conviction.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I know a lot of people are wondering what's it going to take to actually go through with expungement? What's it going to look like? Are people going to be able to start lining up outside the courthouse and saying, okay, great, let's get rid of that? Do you have any idea?
Oh, I have all the ideas, but come November, we're going to have a real opportunity. What I'm exploring is how to make it universal and automatic. So and if you want to go into the weeds, that's
Sure.
a fun. If you want to get into the weeds on this one of the things that 207 does is it provides expungements based on the volume and mass of the marijuana that was possessed in this prior conviction. It's going to be really hard for a lot of folks to be able to show that, given how historical their prior conviction may or may not be. So I think it's even more important in our largest county in our state that we have somebody who's committed to this and who isn't going to perpetrate unfairness when it comes to expungements, particularly for people who aren't going to be able to find or prove the amount that they, that might have formed their prior conviction. So, but we're hopefully going to have some very exciting news about how to make it universal and automatic.
Awesome.
And if I can just highlight a couple actions that have happened around the country, we've seen amazing partnerships between nonprofits and prosecutors' offices and other local agencies that are holding of those records, partnering to come up with really unique ways to address expunging all those convictions automatically, while simultaneously making a legacy investment in improving the overall records collection systems of that jurisdiction in the first place. Under our federalist structure and thinking about local control and local empowerment, unfortunately, a lot of these programs, and I can't speak to Maricopa County specifically, but a lot of these systems are just out of date, wildly out of date. We think about red tape, and the way that we came to think about it is that's how they would bind the records of veterans fighting in the Civil War with red ribbon as they navigated it. A lot of these offices still have paper files. So if we can through expunging marijuana convictions, work to help standardize and modernize these programs, they can better and more efficiently serve their communities for every other aspect of law enforcement and community protection. So, it's really a rising tide lifts all boats. You're removing that scarlet letter that's preventing people from being able to get jobs and housing and continue to hold them back throughout the rest of their life. And you're making substantive improvements and making sure that there's better community policing moving forward.
Perfect. That's actually the question I was going to ask you, Justin. So, I'd like to talk about one of the other aspects of Prop 207, and that's home grow. Now, one of the things that I know is that, you're allowed 6 plants with Prop 207 or 12 per household, right? But what happens once you have that 13th plant? Once those limits those are reached, right? Mm-hmm. And I know it's a question that a lot of other people have out there too. From a prosecutor standpoint, what actually happens right now with if you're caught with home grow, but also what's going to happen afterwards? After Prop 207 actually makes it through.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really great pragmatic question, right? Because whenever you have a proposition that goes to the ballot, there's always going to be things that you wish you could change, that maybe that you could modify, or things that could be done better. And spoiler alert, legislation's the same thing. Whether it's done by the people or whether it's done by the legislature, there's always going to be things that could be done a little differently or perhaps a little better. And I think this is probably one of those things, that there's not a phase in of penalties when it comes to, sub 13th plant, or what it means to have a clone, and how that would actually play out. So one of the things that I'm committed to doing is being in community conversation to make sure that when we figure out how we're going to pursue what is left of cannabis crime in Arizona, that we're doing it in a way with justice in mind, so that nobody's going to be caught off guard. So it's not going to be a surprise to anybody. But more importantly, it's not going to be a surprise to the taxpayers, who all of a sudden are paying for these outrageous jail and prison fees that we do right now, that don't make anybody any safer, and that destroy lives and tear apart families.
And regarding the lawful right for limited home cultivation, I'm much less worried about the individual who may be growing 13 plants instead of 12 than I am about an individual who doesn't have the lawful right to grow 1. And right. The reason why it is critical to maintain the at least a statutorily limited lawful home cultivation is because it takes away the ability for law enforcement to enter somebody's house without a warrant, purely predicated on the suspicion of cultivation of cannabis. So, a law enforcement officer could show up on your front door, knock, say, "Oh, I smell the odor of marijuana. I believe you're growing marijuana." They wouldn't be able to enter your house without a warrant unless they would be able to get it signed, because they had a reasonable suspicion that you were growing more than 12. Now, what does 13 plants smell like compared to 11? They smell like the same thing. So what it would force police to do the kind of police work that they should be doing. So if they do have a legitimate concern or credible suspicion that an individual may be cultivating cannabis and selling it into an illicit, unregulated market, then they should be able to continue to build on that, the tips that they got, build out their information, and get a judge to happily sign that warrant. But absent them doing that police work, they should not be able to enter someone's home just because they're growing a couple plants. And it's really, the plant count number, I'm less worried about if it's 3 or 6 or 12, as long as it's at least 1. Because with all due respect to Julie, we have some phenomenal lawyers who would love to take on the police if they entered someone's house based on suspicion of growing more than 12 and they didn't have a judge's warrant signed for it. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, and it's absolutely critical that we get a foothold in there, establishing the legal right for home cultivation.
Thank you, Justin. There's some other protections too that are included in Prop 207 that haven't even been mentioned here. I know that parental rights is something that while it doesn't come out directly and say that, there's something in there that actually brings that standard back home, right, Julie?
That's absolutely right. Part of Prop 207 says that no rights may be abridged based on, use or cultivation of marijuana that are rights that are fundamental in Arizona or under the United States Constitution. And that gives me hope because there are few rights that are more fundamental than the ability to parent one's own children. So I am hopeful that will end some of the more unjust, child separation that we've seen here through our DCS system as it, involves cannabis. And I'm hoping that it leads to some more reasonable decisions with respect to custody as well.
That'll be great. I know that, one of the things with that DUI protection in there as well is, it brings it back up to the standard that, is used for alcohol, and that's impaired to the slightest degree. Now, what exactly does that mean when we're talking about cannabis versus alcohol?
Is that to me?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we're still driving behavior. That's going to be what it is instead of what has been happening under our law, which is oftentimes, blood test. We see, evidence that THC was in the blood. And we all know how problematic the science is that underlies those determinations. And it's going to mean that when we get into court, it's going to be driving behavior and evidence of dangerousness.
And that's great. I think bringing that standard up, to the same level is something that, is extremely important here. I mean, come on, guys. As of right now, I'm not sure if everyone knows, but, all you need is some active metabolites in your system to be charged with a DUI. And if you're a medical card holding patient right now, that means that if you smoked the night before, if you, biked or whatever you want to call it, if you ate a couple edibles and help you get to sleep, you are at risk of driving to work the next morning or driving, anywhere, within up to what I think it's about 24-hour period in getting pulled over and charged with the DUI. In fact, that happens all the time, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. This is something that we see all around the country, and slowly but surely we're seeing as more and more states reform their policies to be in line with reality, we're seeing a move away from that. So this is a natural course for Arizona to be taking. It's a strong step in the right direction. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. And that's why I have every confidence that Arizona NORML is still going to be on the ground, working hard to make sure that we bring in these marijuana policies so that way no consumer is unduly discriminated against under the law, and to adapt with evolving science and technologies. And when it comes to impairment detection standards and whatnot, because as of right now, we don't have that kind of analogous breathalyzer like alcohol. But that's going to be a fight that we are going to be in a much, much better position to win once we legalize marijuana with 207 in Arizona.
Absolutely.
Right. And, the other thing that I wanted to note, maybe Justin, you can chime in here too, is that the parade of horribles when it comes to driving and cannabis use has not been borne out in the experience of other states who have embarked upon legalization.
Correct. One thing I have personally had to testify multiple times right after somebody in a state legislature who's laying out this parade of horribles, and I love that you use that term because that's the one I use as well. And they if you only listen to the one piece of data that they use, which is the number of tests coming out of Colorado, they would make it seem like as if the highways of Colorado run red with the blood of the innocent. But because they say that, after legalization, there was a huge uptick in the number of people who were tested and tested positive for trace metabolic elements in their system after a car accident. And while that is true on its face, what they fail to disclose, and whether or not it was intentionally here, I have my suspicions. But what they fail to disclose is that when Colorado legalized, they changed the protocol for how they conduct those tests. Where it used to be the officer on the scene, if they deemed it necessary, would conduct a blood test. And to now, anytime that there was a traffic fatality, they would conduct a blood test. So that means if you consumed cannabis a week earlier, then that would have triggered saying that you had those trace metabolic elements in your blood, which then now are the proponents of criminalization and prohibition would characterize as, that's the worst. I mean, that's like saying you had a drink a week ago and you're drunk driving today. It's absolutely absurd. So we need better data, we need better detection methods, and we're only going to get there if we're operating on some kind of common sense of what reality is, and that's what 207 moves us towards when it comes to dissecting and really getting into the nitty gritty or into the weeds of all of the other aspects of public policy that we haven't been able to fully get. So Prop 207 is going to give us that common baseline that's rooted in reality to be able to make sure that we have adequate public safety policies in place, and not deny people their freedom, their liberty, and their right to consume cannabis, as long as they're not doing so in a way that puts others' lives at jeopardy.
That's right. And I don't think there's anyone here that supports driving while impaired.
No.
But just making that extremely clear that that is something that is absolutely not supported. By any of us, so legalization, keeping our streets and our roads safe, you have our full support in keeping our roads safe. Absolutely. Now, Justin, I know that there's a lot of other stuff happening around the country right now as well. We'd love to hear some of the other successes and things that are going on that, I'm sure our viewers would love to hear about as well.
Now, it seems like there's a victory almost every day, be it new data or new reports coming out that affirm the successes of the legalization experiments that are now happening in the almost super majority of states and territories. We had just on Thursday, the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act 2.0, which included the safe banking language, which would help normalize a consumer marketplace in these areas by allowing the lawful regulated industry access to the financial sector. So that would help us, have a more efficient system for consumers. And that was the third time that language has been included as a vehicle and getting passed by the House of Representatives. Unfortunately, the Senate still refuses to take it up. We have a public commitment from the House Majority Leader, Steny Hoyer, a Democrat out of Maryland, who has said that we will have a vote on the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, or MORE Act, shortly after the election. We were supposed to have this vote in September, but unfortunately, due to the toxic partisan nature of Washington, D.C., there were a lot of lawmakers who were concerned about having this vote on marijuana prior to there being an additional COVID package. So while the champions of criminalization and cruelty may seek celebratory actions in the short term, for delaying that vote, it is only a delay, and justice is coming, and we are getting closer and closer to ending the failed federal prohibition. And Arizona, knocking on the desk, is going to legalize marijuana come November. Hopefully you're going to be joined by the great states of New Jersey, Montana, South Dakota, and then we have medical ballot initiatives currently being considered by voters in South Dakota and Mississippi too. I think Arizona, you guys are going to have a real argument with some of your friends up north of you, as far as who's going to legalize it the best this cycle. And see how fast you're able to get it implemented and make sure that we don't have too many hiccups. But no, I mean, it's crazy times. And, we are a movement that's met its moment. Now a super majority of Americans support outright legalization of marijuana. Nearly unanimous support amongst Democrats, almost 70% amongst those identifying as independent. And now we're seeing in poll after poll an outright majority, 51, 52, 54% of Republican voters support legalization. So the only thing standing in the way still are elected officials. And if folks like Julie have their way, soon they'll all be on our side too. And we're really going to be able to have real conversations about other things that impact our communities, and we can stop wasting our time on this failed experiment of prohibition and just start moving forward.
And to that point, we've got some volunteer opportunities that are going to be coming up, actually starting this week, I think, right, Justin?
Yes, we are. I'm very, very excited. We're about to email out the link to the Arizona list as soon as I get off of this call or this live stream to sign up. We're going to be in partnership with the Safe and Smart Arizona campaign. We're going to be doing predictive dialing calls on Thursday evening and Saturday. So if you're not already on the Arizona NORML list, email list, or on National NORML's list under, and identifying that you're in Arizona, now is the time. And I'm sure you're going to share out that link just in a few minutes. So yeah, we are announcing today is we're starting our Get Out the Vote phone bank efforts. Now that ballots are going to be arriving in people's doors, in as short as 2 days. So it's now, if for those watching, if you've been sitting on the sidelines and you've been wondering what is the best thing you can do to help legalize not only Arizona, but the nation at writ large, is help us make phone calls to Arizona voters, help us ensure that they know that they have the opportunity to vote on this historic legislation. Make sure that they know that the majority of people who are in Arizona plan to vote for it, because you get that bandwagon effect. We just need to make sure people know that this is popular and that they feel comfortable joining in on it. We're not asking people to smoke pot. I don't care whether or not another human being ever tries it for the first time. I just want to make sure that the people who do choose to consume it, as long as they do so responsibly, are not going to be discriminated against or have sheriffs like the incumbent right now in Maricopa go after them for simple possession.
Absolutely. Thank you, Justin. And I will be sending out that link here shortly after the broadcast ends, probably seeing as what you'll be doing as well with the email list. And Julia, what does your future hold here over the next few weeks? What are you looking forward to? And, what are some of the things that you'd like to bring up for discussion?
Yeah, so for those out there watching, I need your support. I need your vote on days when you're not phone banking or text banking for NORML. We have phone and text banking launching every single day. It's at gunnigle2020.com. That's GUNNIGLE 2020.com. And I could also use your support. These campaigns, they cost money to run. It costs money to reach people, and anything you could do would be so appreciated, because we need to win. We need to get out the vote. We need a win on 207, and we need a prosecutor who believes in the cause of ending marijuana prohibition in the seat of the third largest prosecutor's office in our entire nation. Let's get this done.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you so much, Justin. Guys, we've got our chapter meeting coming up here for Arizona NORML tomorrow at 7 o'clock. I will be scheduling that here tonight, so it'll show up in your live stream. A little reminder there that you can bookmark, for tomorrow. Thank you once again for joining us tonight. I'm Ryan Wilson, the Executive Director of Arizona NORML. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you so very much. Yeah, everyone have a good one.